Hey everyone, welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. What's up, everyone? How is your dystopia going? The Delta variant is hitting Los Angeles pretty hard, and everyone's got to wear masks again. Not that I wasn't wearing one anyway, but yeah, that's how it's going over here. But I'll tell you what helps take the edge off of the impending apocalypse, and that's today's episode with Steve Aylett. Now, if you don't know who Steve is, why don't I read you his bio right now? Born in Bromley, writer Steve Aylett is the author of over a dozen novels, comics, and collections of short fiction. He started to get acclaim for his writing with his third novel, Slaughtermatic, which was shortlisted for the 1998 Philip K. Dick Award. Slaughtermatic was part of his Beerlight series, and this, along with the Accomplice series, make up the bulk of his most well-known work, although one of his best works, Lint, a satirical Zelig-like biography of a Philip K. Dick, Hunter S. Thompson, Ken Kesey pastiche, stands relatively alone. His latest comic, Hyperthick, will be released at the end of July by Floating World Comics. I ordered it already, have you? This was great. We recorded this mid-March, but I held it because I wanted to wait until it was closer to Hyperthick coming out. I love Steve Aylett. There's no one like him. Honestly, it's not hyperbole. I remember when I read the first book of the Accomplice series. That was my doorway into Steve's work, and it just kind of blew my mind. And then Lint was the thing that kind of just like knocked all the doors off my brain. Is that a metaphor? It is now. And man, I just love this talk. I thought there were so many interesting things between him living in a permaculture community to his thoughts on creativity. So yeah, I hope you like this. And if you do, and you want to check out other episodes of Beginnings, the last 100 are on whatever podcatcher you use. They're all up there on Spotify for whatever reason. What I like to do in this intro, though, is a little recommended if you like. If you like Steve, you might like these other interviews I did with other authors. That's the theme. Ben Marcus, Heidi Julavitz, Brian Evanson, Chuck Klosterman, Helen DeWitt, Rick Moody, John Ronson, Simon Critchley, Harry Matthews, Sam Lipsyte, Mike Sachs, David Sirota, as well as, writers from many different TV shows. So if you like what you hear and you want to subscribe to the show, you can do that on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcast from. And I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Andy Beckerman. Amazing episodes coming up. Joe Jack Talcum from the Dead Milkmen, Terry Riley, Robert Popper, brilliant British comedy writer. Bill Oakley, one of the early Simpsons writers. So many interesting interviews coming up. So stay tuned for those. But for now, let's talk to Steve.
For me, I'm kind of going back to Scotland in a few weeks, and then I'm kind of like out of the loop of all this because I'm going to a very obscure, isolated island and kind of living off the land, basically.
Really?
I'm kind of like I'll be a bit sort of out of this situation, but it's been kind of like I'm glad that there has been the whole digital thing, that we can do Zoom and all those kinds of things. But I think I'm probably suited to survive this kind of thing better than some people. I'm a fairly, I can be a bit antisocial at the best of times. So,
Wait, when you say going to live off the land, is that something you've done before? Like lived in a rural area and...
Well, I've, the last few years, 2.5 years, something like that, I lived at a eco village in Scotland called Findhorn. and where they kind of, they build their own houses, and it's all, I'm very into kind of permaculture and growing perennial veg and things like that. And I've visited there a few. I've been visiting Findhorn for years, like since the late 80s, I think 87 or 88 was the first time I went there. But more recently, I've done a kind of deeper dive into it and actually lived there for a couple of years. And that was an experience. It was, I never kind of, with any kind of philosophy or setup, I never kind of swallow the entire thing. I just take the bits that work for me and so on. I guess most people do that. But last year I basically was, just kind of gardening really during the summer. It was an amazing summer actually. And there weren't many people visiting Findhorn because it kind of had to semi-close. And I was just kind of growing giant vegetables, basically. And I got very into that. And, it's very good for the sort of mental health and so on. And it was balanced out by the fact that I was doing a load of writing as well. So it's like this perfect balance of doing this kind of huge kind of creative work and then going out, and there's this much slower kind of natural process going on, and also that's a process that's much more of a kind of a collaboration. And the difference is also, I find if I'm, I was growing these kind of perennial kales, which can basically, you don't have to re-sow them every year. They just continue to grow. Even over the winter, they'll grow, and you can eat them. Mm-hmm. And they're huge, and they just I got very into doing that. And it's such a different thing. Because I hear people talking about gardening, and it's like, oh yeah, but I really got into it because it's amazing to kind of plant something and then not have to be paying attention to absolutely every single molecule of the process. With my writing stuff, I have to put every single atom in place, really, really kind of like, and make sure it stays there, and like all this. So with growing stuff, it's amazing to just sort of, you go back there the next day and like, oh, well, this has happened, and it's like, all you have to do is really kind of create the conditions for it, and it goes. Because plants just want to grow. That's all they want to do, is just express this thing that's in the seed, in the DNA or whatever, and just, and
it's a process where you just have to wind it up.
Yeah, kind of, and just sort of keep the pigeons off it, and that, it's just like. So that was amazing. So I had like these sort of 4 foot tall kales growing just in one season, So I'm going to be doing a bit more of that probably when I go back to Scotland. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. Kind of something just kind of fell into place when you were talking, when you're saying about like in terms of writing. Like I found it very difficult to write over the last year. And I just realized as you were talking, I'm like, oh, right, because you have to pay attention to every single atom. And what my brain has been doing for the last year is paying attention to every single atom of putrescence, every single thing that could contaminate my household, because we've been pretty quarantined. I realized the minute I step outside, the minute I touch something, my brain like sees my hand as like glowing red. And it like pays attention to everything my hand is touching, because it's like, well, that's contaminated now. And then you have to like wash that thing. And it pays attention to every possible contaminant. And because it's doing that, that's where all my energy is going, as opposed to I've just only started really writing again in the last month or so, as I think my brain has started to relax a little bit. And I realized that energy, that kind of paying attention to every molecule energy, has been going to something else as opposed to my craft. And that's real. I just put that together as you were talking. But I'm really curious about Findhorn. Is it Findhorn? Torn?
Yeah, Findhorn.
Findhorn.
It's one of the kind of, it's one of these sort of intentional communities, kind of new age-ish. And this is why I say, I'll take some of it and not all of it. But it's like, I think it's probably like the oldest intentional community in Europe anyway. It's been around for like about 50 or 60 years, something like that. And I've been visiting there for a while, but I've done a kind of a deeper dive recently. And it was good.
When you moved there, did you have to rearrange how you lived?
It was just a kind of a paring down of things. I mean, I had been living in Cambridge, and that whole situation kind of fell to bits anyway. My relationship with my girlfriend collapsed, and actually everything collapsed all at once, kind of thing. So I was having to kind of, pare down my sort of baggage and bits and pieces anyway. So I just thought, I'll go to Findhorn again, see what that's like. It'd been a while since I'd been there, and I've changed and it may have changed and all this kind of thing. So I thought I'd see how it was. I ended up staying for like, 2.5 years or something like that, in one form or another. And it was very good for me, actually. And strangely enough, I mean, one of the big issues that I kind of use places like Findhorn for is like thinking in terms of, kind of the individual in a collective, how to do that, especially if you're very individual. Do I serve things better if I tone things down and blend in and bland things out? Or do I serve things better if I really bring myself completely, including everything and all the weirdness and everything? And I definitely decided on the latter. That's really? That towards the end, I just thought, okay. Because believe it or not, I've very much, or at least to some extent, I've always reined in my weirdness in the past, generally. But I'm not doing that anymore. And that serves the writing really well. I mean, I've done some of the last year, I've done some of the best writing I've ever done, and the weirdest. So it's just really colourful, it's got colours that don't have names. It's just really, and most of that has gone into this comic that I've put together, this Hyperthick comic.
Yeah, I'm very excited for that.
It's got some really, I'm really pleased with it. And I don't really even really know why. I don't know why that happened, but it just like, it might have even been in deciding to just be as weird as I am. It's a lot of people at those kinds of communities, if we're talking about Findhorn and so on, go the other way. And no, I just thought, no, I mean, and seeing the kind of creativity that there often is that generally comes out of new age stuff. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you've read any kind of new age fiction, it's not very good. It's incredibly, it's really bland, and what's going to happen all the way through. The sort of Richard Bach, Paulo Coelho sort of, I don't know. It's not too great, and I would never want to go down that route. Which is what some people suggested. They said, "Well, you got this show. Why don't you write something about this sort of, new age?" No, really, no. I'm gonna do the stuff that only I can do, and that's what I'm here for.
Yeah. It's interesting because I don't know if you saw Adam Curtis's new documentary series, but it's about this kind of this dialectic in the 20th into the 21st century of individualism versus collectivism, and how we've swung all the way to individualism. I mean, especially in America, in a very malignant way here in America, and that there's this kind of like, it's something I struggle with too. I've struggled with all my life in this kind of like, because I'm kind of a weird person, and do I flourish in my weirdness and alienate the collective in some way, or a lot of the collective, or do I tamp it down and feel weird myself, feel like kind of like alienated myself in order to be more part of the collective? And it's a very, I don't know.
For me, the thing of not tamping it down, tamping it down takes a lot of energy.
Yes.
Putting up a false image, a false characteristic, it takes a lot of maintenance and a lot of energy. I don't have much energy to start off with. I have to be very conscious of where I spend it, I spend that energy. And I've realized that this saves some energy, just being myself. The thing of the kind of things that I do spend my energy on, the thing of sitting there thinking about what someone might be thinking about me, is not in the top 10, whereas it was actually, I think, in the past. So I think I've gone from a thing of like, I think growing older is a thing for me of going from a state of pretending not to care what people think about me to genuinely not caring. And that saves, and the energy that I save on that actually allows me to just actually be a bit nicer to the people that I care about, and not because I'm not constantly living on emergency power, where, it's kind of, everything's very jagged and so on. Plus the writing just really has benefited as well. But I think that I'm not so sure about things going to the extreme of individualism, maybe in terms of people just living for themselves, being selfish, but people being individuals is a different thing. People thinking for themselves. That's what I mean by an individual. Thinking the whole thing right from the ground up, the whole thing. And, I think that's very valuable. And I value that. I mean, there's a lot of people come across the idea of, how the universe began, where it was just like one ingredient. It began with one ingredient or just, I don't know, one tone or something, I don't know. And then it decided to suddenly explode and diversify into all these different shapes and colors and all these things. For what reason? To amuse itself or to experience itself in different ways or something like that. And some people come across this in science, and some people come across it in religion and all this kind of stuff, or they think it up themselves. But I haven't received any memos saying that experiment is over. I really like all the diversification. I like all the different colors and shapes and all the stuff, but most people respond to that idea, that sort of creation myth thing, with kind of like, oh, let's all return to the white light, let's all return to the light and reabsorb. Well, I'm not interested in reabsorbing. I'm really interested in all the colors and the expressing different stuff, and especially, like original stuff. I think it's still possible. I do it.
I mean, were you always aware, like even going back to childhood, that you were, in your words, weird? Because I was. I always had some
Well,
kind of knowledge in
well,
my or something in my head.
I mean, I knew that I was regarded with tremendous suspicion because just through being quiet. I mean, there's a lot of there's lip service given to the idea that kids should be quiet and well behaved, whatever that means. But but what's really expected from a kid is that he or she will be jumping around and screaming and shouting and bouncing off the walls and all this kind of thing. And I was never like that. I was just relatively calm and, and surrounded by kids and adults who were basically hysterical, as far as I was concerned. It was just like, what the hell? So school was a really toxic experience for me. It was just like this incoherent chaos that I barely got through. And I wasn't bullied or anything like that. It was just the general kind of atmosphere of the thing. It was just such a toxic experience. So I guess I sensed that. And the fact that I always had some kind of a little project going on and other kids were just like, not, and that still seems like an odd thing to me when most people don't have a project going on.
Right. Right.
It's like, well, what do you do? But I was thinking about this actually when you told me what this podcast was about. I remembered that when I remember what my first book was that I wrote when I was like about 5 years old, and it was kind of in a in a sort of exercise book, with like in crayon and stuff with drawings and that of it. And it was I really liked I like monster films. And I like dinosaurs and all those old Ray Harryhausen stop motion movies with the dinosaurs kind of, and and I really liked Jason and the Argonauts, which always seemed to be on telly when I was a kid. So when I was about 5, I thought, I'll write a Jason and the Argonauts book. And I kind of, all it really consisted of, and I've been looking for it because I thought maybe it was still existed, but anyway, all it really consisted of was they'd be sailing along and then they'd arrive at an island and then Jason would see the monster, like that giant statue that walks around, or the skeletons with the swords or whatever, and he'd say, "Oh, look, a giant or a bunch of skeletons or whatever," and he'd say, "Get back to the ship," and then the other characters would say, "Okay," and then they just sail off. And this happens like about 6 times in the book, and that's all that happens. And there's drawings of the monsters, but there's no conflict in it. And I've probably said this before, but I mean, I don't think that my understanding of conflict and narrative has necessarily evolved very much since then, because I don't really sort of, that kind of basic, I don't know, people just doing reflex actions isn't very interesting to me. I really like characters. I mean, obviously I'm much more conscious of it now as a thing, but I'm very interested in characters that don't react as expected, or occasionally don't react at all. I find that very funny, and I really respect it. I respect it a lot, and I think it shows respect for the reader. I mean, that you don't know what's going to happen. If a story is just like, well, this happens, then this person reacts in this way, off of which this other person reacts like this, and then this happens. That could be written by a computer program,
Yeah.
Because it's just reactive. I really like characters who start things off from a standing start. That's why I like. I mean, it's kind of a cliched way, but it's a quick way of explaining it. Is the trickster archetype? Of all the archetypes, the trickster is the one that is the only one who isn't just like reacting to things. he's just doing he or she is just doing stuff, and we don't even necessarily ever find out why, but it's really interesting. You know. And I've kind of I think I've got to the point with Hyperthick anyway. I think I've got to the point where every character is a trickster archetype, all of them, which is an interesting kind of dance, because it means they're taking turns at kind of like responding or doing one, but it's just like this person does this person doesn't respond but does this, and then it's just kind of so I can just get rid of so many ideas per page doing that style, you know, original ideas.
Is it a boredom with just regular life? Because I think that's what it is for me, that just the routine of existing is just kind of boring. And so I'm like, why do I want to replicate that? I mean, there's some things I want to, sometimes when I'm writing something, I want to ground it, obviously, in reality, and then let that be there so that I can have the characters do unexpected things. But I find a lot of times when I write something that is quote unquote weird, it's because I'm just bored I'm like, I have to live my life. Why do I want to make my life on the page? I want to
I think,
do something new.
I think there's in real creativity, there tends to be mischief, you know?
Yeah.
Sort of one of my little sayings was the best way of getting into something is to think of it as mischief, you know? And that's helpful to me. I mean, I've tried a couple of times to do the kind of normal thing where I've presented a kind of to a publisher or to an agent. Well, there's this idea, these characters do this, and then but almost immediately they've just started doing weird stuff, and then sometimes even within that there's a level where characters sometimes even take off from that level of weirdness into something of their own. Mm-hmm. You know, it's great when a character just starts doing stuff, and they're not even supposed to be a main character. It's the Boba Fett syndrome. You know, it's just like, okay, there's this, okay, the story or whatever, the stuff I was thinking of originally is happening over here, but then what's this guy doing? This guy's jumping around doing all kinds of stuff. You know, this is, I mean, when I wrote Nova Head, which is one of the Beer Light books, mm-hmm. there was a character in that who was just one of, there were 3 Mexicans and he was one of the Mexicans. And he just suddenly started doing things, you know.
Yeah.
And I ended up having to give him a whole chapter of his own towards the end, because it was just like, what? I don't know why this guy, you know, why is this guy doing this? But it's just like, it was really interesting. And in the, when characters do stuff that, I mean, I tend not to really plan things out really minutely, but I have a shape in my head of the thing. And in the Accomplice books, there were these couple of characters. They were demons that had escaped from hell, and they were sort of like hanging out in Accomplice. Mm-hmm. And that they were kind of like just sort of, every time I wrote a scene where they were in the same scene, they were kind of dancing around each other in some way. And I said, what's going on here? Anyway, and it was just obvious that they were gay, you know, and that they were into each other. And, you know, so, you know, they had a nice wedding, and that was it. But it was not a planned thing, but it just like came up, you know. And it's really nice when there's something like that, when a thing comes alive. Again, it's like planting that garden. You don't have to be there pushing it all the time. Something happens on its own. And it's nice when that happens within creativity, you know.
I mean,
it's really...
When you were a kid, I forget exactly how you phrased it, but you said something about like, that I think you said you barely survived school, and that it was just like a bunch of chaos. Um, I'm probably paraphrasing, but did you feel completely alienated from other people, or did you have friends? Did you fit in at all?
I did have friends, but it was just so much energy went into surviving that environment. It was literally like being in, I don't know, like wading through battery acid or something. It was just like, and remember this, I'm getting on in years. This is like the 1980s, so which was kind of a wasteland anyway. Culturally, I mean, it
Right.
got very colorful. It got quite colorful towards the end, thank God. But most of the 80s was just like really a vacuum. And no, to me, school was like it was anti-creative. It was anti-learning even, and it was like a sort of toxic. Well, a vacuum can't be toxic, but if you could imagine a vacuum with some toxicity in it, that would be the school experience for me, And no, it was just something to recover from, over the next few years. And so I didn't go on to university or to college, whatever, because, I just couldn't stand anything that resembled school, basically, at that point. And I would have been one of these people that would just be found in their dorm room, just hanging by the neck and like, oh, God, we never knew him, all this kind of thing. So I had to get out. Also, I'd never had any money, so I decided to go to work instead.
What did your parents do for a living?
My dad worked in a cigarette factory, and my mum was a cleaner, basically, most of the time. So that's it. My dad basically died of lung cancer. I mean, he knew that smoking was a bad idea, but he was surrounded by cigarettes, all the time. So it was quite difficult for him to give it up. I mean, I say lung cancer plus just working himself to a state of exhaustion, really.
Yeah.
Because I'm from quite a big family. And he just worked. I mean, I realize now, looking back, that he was constantly exhausted, basically, But he was a very smart man. He was very, he's kind of self-educated. He was, he'd read and everything. And he'd occasionally throw a book across the room at me, so read that, I mean, it was probably him that put me onto Voltaire originally, some battered edition of Candide,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, anyway, he died when I was about 17.
Because I'm curious if you fit in with your family too. Like, was it just total, was it always, spending all this energy to fit in, or, could you relax at home?
I think my family kind of got used to the fact that I was quiet. Yeah, I could relax at home. And one of my brothers has a very similar sense of humor to me, and is basically my best friend. But I mean, my family doesn't really do much creative stuff. I mean, not to the extreme that I do. They get married and have kids.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's a family that's very about family, I think. Actually, my sister did one of those kind of DNA tests, where you're supposed to find, and it reckoned there was lots of Italian in there, which might, but I don't feel Italian at all, actually. But yeah, my family has a lot to do with family, and that's not something that particularly interests me, having kids or anything like that.
Yeah, me either.
I mean, I said a kind of fairly sarcastic thing in part of the original, which is like about 50% sarcasm, really. where I said something like, a lot of people just kind of, I wish I had the words in front, because I'm quite good with words. So I wish I remembered how I actually said it now. But, this thing of people just kind of deferring any kind of real accomplishments onto the next generation, and then they defer it onto the next and onto the next, and it just goes on with no one actually ever really doing anything except reproducing. And then when someone finally does do something, they're kind of ostracized for being weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's what the next thing I was going to ask, because I'm like, I have the same kind of thing with my family where I don't want kids. My wife and I are really glad that my sister is pregnant, because now that takes the pressure off of us. Because now we can just I hope it does. But like, even my parents aren't vocal about it. But I can tell that they wanted me to just. I can tell, I can feel the, it's like an energy field. You can kind of feel that emotional kind of like expectation that, they wanted me to have kind of a normal life. And when, I didn't, there was some that, they don't say anything, and I don't think they mean to do it, but you can kind of feel that they're radiating a little bit of disappointment that, I did not fit into what their plans were.
Yeah. I mean, but I think there comes, a point at some point where it's like, well, I'm an adult, this is my life, and, who knows how much more there is of it, and so on. And let's just do the stuff that's, that's your joy. I mean, the creative thing is one of the few things that really gives me this sort of gleeful joy. I mean, I'm not a giddily happy person, and never will be. That's not it's just not in my nature. But I really get high out of doing creative stuff. It's just, it can be amazing, And so, I mean, I actually sort of, during this period after which things kind of fell to bits, I decided, I wouldn't write anymore. I thought I'd actually given it up, and made statements to that effect. And that lasted, it did last about like 3 years or something. I just concentrated on other things, sort of more human scale things, which was very, which was good, and it was good for me. But then one day I just sort of I had a little notebook, a tiny little notebook for another reason, and just wrote, one day I just wrote down some idea, and that was it. I was done for. It's like sort of, like people who have quit drinking or drugs or something, and then they just, oh no, suddenly they're back on,
Yeah.
But it was,
I'll just have one.
Yeah, but it was amazing, and I'm really glad that I got back into that. Yeah, it just gives me something that nothing else does.
Do you remember the first time, or like an early time, that you got that charge from doing something creative?
Not specifically. I was just always scribbling stuff down. Yeah, I can't really think of a specific example of that. I know that certain, I remember certain highs from certain books, but that was later on.
Because I'm just really curious about when did this become when did writing or being creative, when did it become like an actual career possibility in your mind, or when did it become something that you wanted to dedicate yourself to, even if not as a career?
Probably, I guess the sort of early 90s, I was sending stuff to publishers and things like that. Got the Crime Studio published, which was kind of like, very early stuff. But yeah, I mean, I probably had a sort of fairly romantic idea of what being a writer was, and sort of the notion of making a living off of it, which is kind of laughable. But yeah, I was really into that idea. But I realized that I was into a kind of what's now a kind of very old-fashioned idea of writer, which is the writer who's kind of off somewhere or other and not kind of all over the media, whereas now everyone's all over the media, whether they've done anything or not.
Yeah.
And that's not my style at all, I've realized, and I've kind of given up any effort to do that really now.
Yeah, that's probably the
Again,
smart way.
it's a part of accepting that I'm a quiet, introverted fellow.
Yeah, it's, I asked that because like I'm trying to like think about, if you come from a pretty like working class background, I'm kind of curious about how you have the notion that this is, because even in America, and I assume that is the same way in the UK, that, it feels like doing something creative for a living is an elite job. And to try to like crack into that strata is, if you don't have like a pathway handed to you by someone, it feels daunting. And I'm wondering if you felt that, or if you just
I think it came from, I just read a huge amount. I still read huge amounts, and I still seem to have read more than most people, and kind of making connections between those things. And I think that was part of it. I read so much that by the time I was actually getting published, actually writing things for publication, I had a pretty good idea of what had already been done. Like a really like connected map of like, this has been done and that connecting with that. And so I won't do that then. I'll do something else. And because I just didn't, and it was kind of like, I think I kind of got a bit sort of jaded early on with what was being written, and wanted to write the sort of book that I would like to find out there. And I'm still kind of doing that in one way or another.
Yeah.
Like with Lint, that was just a whole cornucopia of books that I wish existed. I really wish all of those books existed, in the world. And I would, and just the sheer color of that, the high resolution color, the vividness of it, I really like. And it was great fun writing that as well.
I'm just kind of curious too about like, because you're writing, it does something that a lot of other writing doesn't do, which is it actually changes my brain state in a way, right? And it puts me into like a new way of thinking, which is one of the reasons why I love it so much. And I'm kind of curious about, do you set, when you say you're trying to do something, you want to do something new, do you set out to do something like that? Like, I'm kind of curious about just like, what is the intention in your brain as you go about writing? And did that develop over time? Is it something you had to find?
I have a kind of synesthetic thing going on. So I see ideas as shapes, and some shapes fit together in an interesting way and kind of light up and become vibrant, and that's an interesting idea. And you can take like the front of one idea and the back of another idea and stick them together and see what happens, turn it inside out, change the color of it. And but some ideas just come, that's using available stuff, which you can still get some good material from, or kind of like taking a couple of ideas, putting them there, and then triangulating off to something else over here. It's kind of like I talk about it like idea space. I sort of see ideas spatially. So if someone suggests an idea to me, I won't just bugger around with that idea. I'll start off by, I don't do it quite as methodically as this, but I realize this is kind of what I'm doing. I'll see the opposite idea to that idea, and that by implication will give me everything that's in between those two ideas, those thousands of ideas, and then I can triangulate off of that line a couple of 1,000 miles off in that direction and see what idea might be over there. And there are ideas out there in that space. You can navigate to it. And from this, I guess I had to reach an age where I had built up enough of a map of ideas to be able to start doing that. But some stuff does seem to just drop out of nowhere as a shape, and I'll just bung it down. And individual sentences, sometimes I'll see the shape of the sentence before I know what the words are or what the sentence is about.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll even end up just, it'll be slotted down so intuitively that I'll sometimes actually write the sentence, the last word first, and then the first word, then the middle word, and then like that. So I don't really know where some of the stuff comes from, but I know when it's interesting and when it's kind of that's quite clever, but and I increasingly don't include the stuff that's just a little bit clever. I really, so with hyperthick, there's no filler. It's so rich, ridiculous. And everyone is coming out with this stuff. All the characters are doing it. And also, I think I've avoided the situation of having the female characters being the sort of the straight man, which is very boring. What are you guys up to?
Right.
That kind of thing. It's
classic comedy.
Yeah, it's just that's a sitcom. So everyone is a trickster character. So I'm quite pleased with what I'm doing at the moment.
How did you learn to navigate this topography, right? And this topography that even, I don't know if this is the word I want to use, but I'll throw it out there anyway. That's kind of like atemporal in some way, because as you said, sometimes the last word will come first, and then, other words will pop in because you have this topographic map in mind or something like that. And you can see if we're using this metaphor, this landscape out in front of you.
Yeah.
How did you learn to navigate that?
I think it's just a thing of I've come more and more to trust it and be intuitive with it, and not kind of be it's something that it's very it takes more energy to get in. For me, it takes more energy to get in the way of it than to just let it happen.
Yeah.
So it's a very intuitive thing. It's like I don't know, getting out of the way of it. And not kind of second guessing things, and some stuff will be crap, and in which case I just won't use it,
Right.
It's like I do a similar thing with, actually, there's a thing, sometimes there's a thing I do where I also have to because I do believe in being an editor at the later stage and just getting rid of some of the crappier stuff. And I sometimes get sentences out of dreams, because I quite often have dreams where I'm reading or writing, or I'm in a bookshop looking at some books, and of course it's my dream, so they're all my copyright. All I have to do is pick one up and read it, and if I can then get out of that dream and write some of it down, it might be interesting. But again, you have to use the editor, because there was a thing, this ended up in hyperthick. There's a thing where that went something like, everyone goes home a different way, you can't get home someone else's way. which I thought was, well, that's interesting. That's an interesting thing. And I sort of woke up and scrawled that down in my notebook, plus another sentence that from the same dream. And the next day I sort of said, I wrote some stuff down last night, didn't I, from that dream? I'll have a look at it. So there was the thing about going home, which is good because it's like make your own philosophy, all that means something. But the other sentence was something like, I saw you going up and down the escalator over and over in the middle of last week, something like that. And it's just like, I'm reading this, does that mean anything? And I obviously thought it meant something when I wrote it down, because
right.
A dream can give this sort of profound feeling, but no, it didn't mean anything. It was rubbish. So I do believe in being being an editor. Same thing as like, if you do some sort of like technique, like cut ups or something like that, even Burroughs he seemed to just use all of it. And he really, he should have chucked out a lot of that stuff and just keep the gems, even if it means you've only got like half a page of stuff for a year's work.
Right. Have you always been synesthetic, or is that something that happens like does your brain change and you become synesthetic?
Well, I always have been. I just didn't realize that other people weren't. So I could always see music, and I just thought that was a normal thing, and to see the shape of an idea, and it's a very instant thing. And some music is actually, I was thinking about this the other day. I really like the Cocteau Twins, mm-hmm. And strangely enough, that's one of the few occasions where the cover artwork really does look like the music. I think the guy who did the designs for those 4AD, covers back then, I can't remember his name. I think he might have been synesthetic, because the music really looks like that,
Oh, interesting. It's funny because 4AD is like so instantly recognizable, a 4AD cover.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that stuff. I mean, that's one of the few things it helped me get through the 80s, I think. Cocteau Twins and the Cardiacs. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I'm just curious, like, how do you figure out, right? Because this like, isn't that this Cartesian thing, right? Where you just assume everyone has the same kind of brain architecture as you, or everyone else is kind of interpreting the world in the same way your brain interprets the world, but that's not true most of the time. And then in certain cases like yours, if you're synesthetic, your brain is doing something different from a lot of other people. It's interpreting things in a very different way. And I'm kind of curious, how do you even figure that out? Because it is this, I mean, we're now in this like kind of philosophical area, but like,
I mean, I think maybe one of the things it comes from is actually like the downside of it, of like the atmosphere in a room manifesting as a kind of visual kind of grunginess, or a kind of ache in the air or something like this, which I can't really sort of like put across, and other people just won't remark on it. And enough times when I did that, that it came up, and it sort of just became obvious. And then at some point I obviously read something about synesthesia, and it's like, well, yeah, that's, obviously, doesn't everyone have that? Doesn't everyone do that? But I think a lot of people have things like that, really. There's a lot of what do they call it, neurodiversity.
Yeah.
And people who think in flavors,
Yeah. Yeah.
people who think in tones and people who think in sounds, whatever, textures, all this kind of stuff. And I find it difficult. I mean, I do this as well, like in books where there's someone's thinking and you have a sentence in some quotes, like where they're thinking something and it's in words. But I don't know that. I'm still not sure whether people actually do think in words.
I don't think they do.
No,
I don't think
I
so.
I think people are told that they do, but I don't know that they. Maybe a few people do, but I think that a lot of it is shapes and stuff and mechanisms and images, stuff like that. But when we tell stories, we have to kind of stick words on there rather than saying he saw a, purple cube with a hole in it. It's like, oh, what does that mean?
Yeah. I mean,
So
sometimes like the thoughts coalesce into voices in my head when I'm like trying to purposely think through something, and I'm trying to think through a position, or I'm trying to think through dialogue, because I write scripts and stuff.
Yeah.
Then it's voices and it's what's interesting, I think, is, at least for my brain, it's sometimes it doesn't translate. Even if I have like a sentence in my head and I'm trying to put it onto the page, it doesn't whatever was in my head, even if I have the perfect wording in my head, doesn't necessarily translate to my fingers or to my mouth. And I think that's where I'm like, I find that stuff interesting.
Yeah, because it kind of doesn't bring the atmosphere. Whatever. Well, what is it? What is it that it doesn't bring across? Some sort of atmosphere, some sort of like quirk that's there when you see it, but doesn't translate over. Yeah, it's interesting stuff. I mean, I kind of get into. I remember I did stand up for a brief time. And I remember sort of like repeating little bits to myself in words. But that was, kind of a different thing, because it was a thing where I was going to be standing there and saying stuff,
right.
But I gave that up. Yeah, that was kind of like a weird thing. I did for like about a year and a half. There's a guy called, there's a stand-up comic called Andrew O'Neill, and he was who I know, and he was saying, well, he did this this stand-up night called oh my god, what the hell was it called now? Oh, it was at the Crowbar. Anyway, he did this stand-up night and at this metal bar, and he said, I'll just come along and do this stuff. So I sort of started doing it, and I'd done spoken word stuff before, but hadn't really done stand-up. And it was kind of like I was all right at it, but I had to get myself so wound up into a kind of state, like the thing of kind of modeling or emulating someone else who would be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so different from the way I am. I actually felt kind of. I always afterwards I just feel like I'd been mugged, by myself, and I thought, well, why am I putting myself through that, because I've got no ambitions to be a stand-up comic, But anyway, but I ended up performing with, some big names, who, not because I was a great stand-up comic, but because they were fans of my stuff, of my writing, people like Stuart Lee and
I was literally about to say him. I was like,
and also I just bombed really badly the last couple of performances I did, which were in front of like big crowds of like about 900 or 1,000 people. It was like ridiculous. For me, that's a really big crowd. And it was just terrible. And I really wanted to pack a lot in, and I was really hyper, and it was just like terrible. So I just thought, I'm just not going to do this anymore. Why am I doing this? It was bad.
We're right at the end. I just want to ask one last question. Do you think you would have been, this is a very weird counterfactual, so take it with a grain of salt. But like, do you think the synesthesia and you being introverted fed off each other? Or do you think, because I'm kind of curious if like being synesthetic, if that was already kind of, if like it made you like not want to, if it made school more chaotic than it would have been otherwise, or if it's just like, no, going to school in Thatcher's England was awful anyway, period.
It was awful. But and I guess all the kids of my age were kind of getting through it one way or another. I mean, I knew kids who would inject beer, with a syringe. That was the level of sort of DIY. That's the kind of teenage wasteland we're talking about. But I guess the synesthesia thing it must have made it more abrasive, made me a bit of a sensitive flower kind of thing. And so it was like, everything just felt caustic and toxic and completely exhausting. And even though I got out of that, I then kind of just really kind of continued it into my work life, I always like to think that I re-examine ideas and don't let them in, but I think the model of my father working so hard and working himself to exhaustion, I think I kind of inherited that without re-examining that. It just got in under the radar or something, and I absolutely for decades just worked and was constantly working out of exhaustion. It's amazing that I got any of those books written actually on the in my spare time, but I really kind of continued to take things on the chin. I'm trying to treat myself a little bit better now, and the writing is coming out a lot better as well, I think. So
yeah, interesting how it takes so long to learn that. It's like, oh no, you're actually going to be better at your craft if you treat yourself better.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I necessarily kind of accepted the tortured artist thing, but I was kind of doing it anyway, just kind of like, but I'm hoping that I can continue to sort of not crucify myself constantly, but I'm very pleased with the stuff that I'm doing at the moment. It's, again, it's not for everyone. My stuff will never be for everyone, and it will never be a big commercial thing. Not during my lifetime, anyway. Maybe once I'm out of the way and it can all be repackaged in some way. I don't know, but I actually find that quite freeing at this point. That really no one is paying any attention to what I do.
Did you ever struggle with that? Because I remember being like, even when I was doing like some of the weirdest stuff I was doing, I was like, oh, everyone will love this, even though it's insane. Like I was doing sketch comedy where like literally every line pulled the rug out from under the audience and you could never like actually understand what was going on. And I'm like, everyone's going to love this. And it was just like incomprehensible except to like, 10 people.
Yeah. Yeah. But I like that 10 people thing, I'm like I say, I'm still basically writing this. I'm more than ever actually just writing the stuff that I would want to find out there. And some people have the same tastes that I do, thank goodness. So there's a little bit of an audience there. But anyway, that's perfect, isn't it? Really, just doing the stuff that I really love, and then there's people out there who appreciate it, and being completely freed from. I haven't done this much, but basically now being completely freed from second guessing the audience or what the reception might be, but just, okay, here's this. What do you make of this? This incredibly rich, colourful, fertile thing that I've done. Here it is, you know,
Yeah.
and that's it.
Do you think you were always self-aware of that though? Or do you think you like where I was like, I was not self-aware. And so I'm just like, yeah, obviously this is like for everyone. And then it took me a while to be like, oh no, I'm doing the thing I want to be doing, but this is a niche audience. And I understand that it's for a niche audience and I'm okay with it. It took me a little while to accept that.
I think I sort of begrudgingly sort of accepted that for a while, but not really accepting it. But yeah, I accept it now. Yeah. And I'm a lot happier for it.
Yeah.
It's and the work is a lot better for it as well. And I certainly don't go anywhere near the thing of like pitching some kind of like I'm going to write this book about that, with sort of some commercial thing in view. It's not going to happen. I mean, I'd like to say that I'm, the thing of like being popular and well and all this kind of thing, some big famous writer. I'd like to think that I sort of got past that by becoming incredibly, I don't know, spiritual or something, but it isn't that at all. It just became perfectly obvious it was just never, ever going to happen. It's just like, no, why did I ever think, when I was when I was a teenager or in my 20s, why did I think that then? No, I've let go of that completely. And it frees up energy and it frees up creativity and, people can take it or leave it, Yeah.
Steve, thank you so much for joining me today. This was just a delight to talk to you.
It's been very nice. Thank you. And I'm glad you like my stuff. I'm glad you like Lint. I forget about that sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Good fun.
Mean, literally everything the Accomplice series, like everything I've read, I just love it so much. So thank you so much.
Great. Did you ever get a copy of The Caterer?
No, I never did.
Because that was a thing that I did. Sorry, I'll leave you alone in a minute. But that was a thing that, some people thought that Lint was real, especially in America, you'll be surprised to hear. And I thought, and people would get in touch with me saying, where can I get hold of this book by Lint? Where can I get hold of the Caterer comic? So many people asked me about the Caterer comic. I ended up actually doing one issue of it, just one issue. And it was published by Floating World. Well, they're the same people who are going to publish Hyperthick. But that's, it exists.
Amazing.
It really exists.
Oh, that's amazing. That's one of my favorite things in fiction is like some fiction that's within fiction that then becomes real.
Yeah, that did. I mean, that was another one of the nice things about Lint. It kind of like had developed its own life. It was a thing that people could join in. People would join in with it.
Yeah.
And people did songs about him and all this kind of stuff. It was really good.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, awesome.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me, as they say over here.
Of course. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.